My name's Brett Ralph, and I'm excited to be here to moderate a conversation with Ethan Buckler and Britt Walford about Touch and Go Records' re-release of the remaster remix version of Tweez by the band Slint from here in Louisville, Kentucky. I go way back with Ethan and Britt, and I was lucky enough to see the band perform in its original incarnation. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions for Ethan and Britt, and make sure you stick around for the end when we'll be debuting one of the new mixes of the songs from the remix version of Tweez, done by Ethan Buckler with Ann Gaudier at La La Land here in Louisville. Before we get to the questions that fans sent in for you guys, I'd like to get a little background on what led to this remix and remaster of Tweez and what it was like working on the record again after so many years.
I think that initially what led to it was the old metal parts to stamp Tweez records had worn out. And so Corey from Touch and Go Records contacted us and said, hey guys, these parts have worn out. We're going to have to make new ones. And in order to do that, you have to basically remaster in one way or another. So that was kind of the impetus. And then when I responded to Corey, I said that our friend Tim Furnish from Louisville, the band Crane and Parlor, had come up with an idea of that we should let Ethan remix Tweez and call it Tweethin'. And so that's when we all started talking about that, and really quickly everybody was like, yeah, let's do it.
And the reason why they wanted to have me do it was because 35 years ago after we recorded, I'm the one that I didn't like the way the original mix sounded, the Albini mix. And that's when I parted ways with Slint. So it was appropriate for them to have me do it. Even though I wasn't really the one that remixed it. There was a mix engineer in the studio, and she's the one that remixed it. But I told her what I wanted. So we're calling it the Tweethin' mix. In fact, the studio engineer's name is Ann, so we could have called it the Tweethan mix. Because it would be like Tweez, Ethan, which equals Tweethin', but we could have put Ann's name on there and called it Tweethan, but we didn't go that far. I just thought of that just now.
What was it like working with Ann Gaudier at La La Land? I've never had a chance to record there or see a session go down there yet, but I've heard plenty of raves about the studio and Ann as an engineer.
The reason why I chose her was, for one, she has a lot of experience recording local punk and hardcore bands. Because Slint, basically we're going backwards in time to when we were teenagers, and Slint was just coming out of being sort of a hardcore band. So if you listen to it, it's a little bit hardcore and a little bit something else that came after hardcore. And I thought she would be the perfect, and I listened to her other mixes on her website, and I could tell right away that she would be the one to do it. She gets good tones, and also her mix is very basic, because I wanted her to recreate the mix to sound like we were recording with a jam box, like on a boom box with little stereo microphones. And that's how her other mixes sounded like. Everything's up in the middle, and then you got the guitars on either side of the stereo field. And really, I just got her started, and she did it. She was really the one that did it. And I wanted to make it sound like a practice tape. So we had a real practice tape to base it on. And I had her listen to the real practice tape, and then we took snippets of the hiss out of between the songs on the practice tape, and we put it in between the songs on the remix. So it gives the illusion that you're listening to a practice tape with the tape hiss.
Rehiss.
We hit rehiss. So at the beginning of the song, you hear the tss, and the sticks are clicking. But it really is Steve Albini's recording. We just remixed it to sound like a practice tape. and really made it sound like what Slint sounded like before Albini recorded us. So it's really that first year of Slint when I was in Slint is what you get. And I think that's the Slint that most people haven't heard yet. We thought that since there isn't a lot of Slint stuff to hear out there, we really only have 2 albums. So now you got 3.
You mentioned Slint being kind of a hardcore band at first. I think plenty of people think Slint invented post-rock, either Slint or Tortoise is the word on the street as far as I can tell. And I've never really heard Slint referred to as a post-hardcore band. I certainly have thoughts about your all's relationship to hardcore. I wonder how you all feel about Slint as originally a hardcore band, or what debt or influence Slint might have derived from hardcore music in Louisville or beyond.
Well, the band that was before Slint, there was a sequence of bands. So the band before Slint was Maurice, right? Maurice was kind of like a mathematical hardcore band.
Yeah, kind of metal, kind of also influenced.
And you're coming from Dot 39, which was a hardcore band.
And I played in a hardcore band in high school called Dot 30. I didn't have nowhere near the musical experience that they did at the time. Britt had already recorded in Squirrel Bay, and Paho had been he'd been playing in like cover bands for years. He was like and Brian was in Squirrel Bay. So all I did was I played in a hardcore band senior in high school. But I love being in Slint most because I was so glad I didn't have to play hardcore anymore. I'm so glad to be done with that. And I think we were all done with hardcore. I think we were ready to move on to the next thing. And so you could call it post-hardcore, you could call it indie rock, post-punk, art rock, I don't know.
My nickname for Slint was Punk Floyd.
Punk Floyd. And when we met Steve Albini, he said we sounded like, I forgot what he said, King Crimson. He said we sounded like King Crimson. I was like, what? You don't sound like King Crimson.
A lot of people said that.
Yeah, I've heard other people say that too.
But I know I never listened to King Crimson.
I think it's the song Rhoda reminds some people of King Crimson, but I don't know why.
Well, this seems like a natural segue to one of the questions from fans, which is what bands or artists were you listening to while making the album? You weren't listening to King Crimson. Mm-hmm. What were you listening to when you made Tweez?
What's the name of the fan that wrote that?
Oh, that's from multiple people.
Oh, okay.
Strange name.
Well, at the beginning, it was, I would say, really it was what Britt was listening to. I was totally open to listening to new stuff. I was tired of Black Flag. I was tired of Minor Threat, so I was ready to listen to some new stuff. And it was really Britt that had the stuff to listen to, I would say. And then also the Squirrel Bait influence and what they were listening to. So Replacements, Husker Du, Meat Puppets, Sonic Youth, Television,
Big Black,
and then towards the end,
a little later.
I think towards the end of the year, it became Big Black because we were going to record, and then the Big Black thing started to happen. Dinosaur.
Yeah.
We were all interested in that stuff. And then for me, I started listening to more like classic rock. I never liked classic rock. But I started, I started smoking weed and stuff. It was my first year of college. So I started listening to the Beatles and I heard a lot of R.E.M. I like R.E.M. now. I didn't like R.E.M. at that point. But we were definitely open to something more musical. Hardcore, hardcore is very rigid, There's only so much you could do with it. But me and Britt, one time we went to Cincinnati and we saw the I forget what they're called.
Bad Brains?
Yeah, the Bad Brains. and the Bad Brains were half reggae and half hardcore. And so I think because of that, I think that kind of gave us the idea of us being like half hardcore and half something else.
Interesting.
Wow.
Our next question is from Mora. Do you remember what the first Slint Tweez song was? Was it by any chance Pat, which sounds a lot like Maurice's unreleased New Dave?
That is correct.
Pat is New Dave?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, that was a major step in forming Slint. Dave came up with New Dave, and I've never really talked to Dave about it. It seems almost maybe kind of irreverent to me, but it might not have been at all. It was definitely also just like, I think, happy and inspired and cool, and just Dave really kind of pioneered that new direction, playing clean.
Mm-hmm.
So
You think he pioneered that in Louisville or within the whole American underground?
just in our band, because we had only ever played heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then
On the Tweethin' mix, I changed the name of that song back to New Dave.
Oh, wow. So, cool.
yeah,
Way to go, Mora.
the next thing I remember was we called it Snoopy song, the Darlene song. Is that the first song that you?
The first song I remember was the do 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 do.
Yeah.
Is that Darlene?
Mm-hmm.
I changed that one to Tokens of Affection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you change the names to all the songs on the new mix?
Yeah, except for Rhoda,
Very cool.
because Rhoda was already called Rhoda.
Mm.
But all the ones that were named after our parents, I changed them back to the original names.
Who changed them to the parents' names? Was that Steve?
It was Britt.
Was Britt?
Oh, I don't know. That could have been Brian's idea or Dave's. If it wasn't yours, I don't. I think maybe Brian.
Well, it kind of goes because the picture on the cover was his parents' sob. So
Well, it was actually just, my parents didn't have a sob anymore. It was some guys that I just found on the street at a car wash, and he said we could, he would let us use his car.
no kidding, I did not know that.
Well, you've anticipated a later question I was going to ask, which is, where did the idea for the artwork come from? And that question is from Hector. I guess we could answer that now since we already touched on that.
Okay.
I mean, I thought our music sounded like a sob looked, sort of. That was what I was thinking, I guess.
So you chose that photograph or that concept for the artwork.
I mean, I remember us talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
It's very it's very objective to have like a picture of an object on the cover of an album.
Mm.
You don't see that with a lot of albums.
Were you influenced by Motoric or Krautrock or Noi Kraftwerk, the kind of music maybe that a car like that would evoke? Is that a connection? Were you guys listening to that kind of stuff yet?
I wasn't.
No.
I wouldn't know.
I don't know. To me, it's a very clean picture of a sob. I don't know. It almost looks like a picture you'd see in an '80s magazine. It's like perfectly captured photograph. Will did the picture, right?
His dad took the picture,
Joe Oldham.
but yeah, he's in the car.
And it's weird because it's a very un-rock and roll album cover, but there's nothing more rock and roll than putting a car
Right.
on an album cover. You kind of having it both ways at once.
But not a European Swedish car.
Right.
Yeah.
A Saab is like if you think Volvos are too predictable, you go take it to one step further and get a Saab.
It's not a pun on the
wanna-
word Saab.
If you want to be a little bit different from everybody else, you get a Saab. Right.
Did you imagine that people would sob when they listened to it?
A rock and roll car would would be like, a Chevy or something. Wouldn't be a Saab.
Mustang Fastback.
Yeah. Or motorcycle or something.
Or Big Irv's Dodge Coronet. All right, our next question is from Jake. Could you discuss your process for practicing and refining songs? How were changes conveyed and remembered?
Well, we practiced almost every day. We probably practiced 3 to 5 days a week. And I've never been in a band that practiced that much ever since.
Yeah, I remember I think people would just have ideas that they would bring to practice, and then other people would write their parts for it. We would talk a lot. It seemed like really very democratic, as far as how we figured the songs out, and repetitious, and maybe we made some notes, but I think I remember mostly just like memorizing from repetition.
A lot of those songs started out as instrumental songs. And that was probably one of the things that got us into trouble when we recorded. We didn't really have the lyrics worked out. It's very much an instrumental band. And Britt was a classical piano player. And he would practice his classical piano for 2 hours before we even started having Slint practice. And so there's definitely a classical influence on some of the Slint music.
Was that hardcore practice regimen? Was that at your behest, Britt? And do you think that's coming from your classical training, your desire for repetition and constant practice to bear upon the quality and solidity of the music?
I don't really know. I remember Maurice being that way, and it's almost like it's a kind of a hardcore or do-it-yourself band sort of tenet is, it's almost like practice is almost really where it's at, where you're really like, it's its own thing. And I was inspired by it seemed like the tightest or most practiced band ever that in our minds was the Babylon Dance Band, and they were like first generation punk Louisville band, sort of like the, godfather or grandfather or father and mother band of Louisville. And then you guys Malignant Growth,
And we practiced Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday without fail. And if you missed or called off of practice, you were in the doghouse for a month. And so I don't know if you all Big Irv had to drive me to practice. I wasn't even driving yet, but I was amazed that we were practicing 3 times a week. And we all knew about Black Flag. They practiced legendarily for like 7 hours a day or whatever it was. And I know we'd all read about that. I just didn't know if that came from your classical background or more of just like that's how, if you want to be tight, that's how you got to do it.
Yeah, being inspired by all the amazing bands,
Mm-hmm.
We were young and competitive. I love practice. That was my favorite thing we do every day.
Totally.
Was go to Slint practice. I was looking forward to it all day long.
Nice.
Definitely.
He also had a great practice space. They had soundproof walls, or at least it was like wooden stuff on the walls made it so it sounded really great in there.
Our next question's from Danny. Why didn't King's Approach ever make it onto an album?
That's later. That's like post Spiderland, post breakup song when we sort of like got back together and worked on some stuff for a little while.
Did you play that song live in the reformed incarnation of the band?
Yeah, we did most of the time.
This one's from Tom. Was the guitar riff from Nan Ding inspired by a Grateful Dead song?
That's a good question.
Did Dave write that one?
Yeah, Aho has so many influences and like kind of deep knowledge I don't know.
I've never heard Dave talk about the Dead, which is not to say that he's not a fan necessarily.
Right.
We haven't talked about everything, but I don't ever remember the Dead coming up in conversation with Dave. But probably until 2 or 3 years ago, I never would have been talking about it. Anyway.
Yeah.
This question's from Ashley. Are there any specific parts in songs, not full songs, that you are particularly proud of? Drum fills, bass lines, riffs, what portions of Tweez are you proudest of as musicians?
I really like the bass line. The first bass line that Britt gave me was do 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 do. That's my proudest bass line. I love that bass line.
Cool.
There's no bass line quite like it. It has a pause. You know what they say, music is playing and also not playing. And that bass line has them both.
Cool, yeah.
Because it has that unusual pause in it. But when the beat comes in, it sounds great.
Man, yeah, the main thing for me is that bass line just kind of came out of nowhere. I was super high. I'd gotten high with Greg Maddox, who now goes by
Grace McAllister.
And yeah, I don't know, I was just like, I almost couldn't drive. I was like shaking. Just had it pop in my head.
That's when driving's the most fun. People may not know that you have written bass lines, guitar parts, like you're not just coming up with the beats in Slint. You composed a fair amount of that music. Is that not right?
Yeah. I mean, luckily I was the drummer and everybody left their stuff in my house, so I got to play, Brian and Dave's guitars. So
You weren't writing on guitars of your own. That was happenstance, just having the rehearsal space outfitted and ready for you to do what you felt like doing.
yeah.
Interesting. Had you composed on piano before that? Had you written piano pieces, or were you just recreating classical compositions?
Yeah, just that. Yeah.
This one is from William and N. Do you have any funny stories or particularly fond memories from when you were recording Tweez and your time in Evanston?
Well, that was when we did Tweez. That was a crazy time. Let's see. I don't even know where to begin with that. That's where Steve Albini had us do some of those gags that we did. Like he had a bag. The first thing that when we walked in his house, well, first of all, we went to his house with a shotgun. And I pointed the shotgun at Steve Albini, which sounds like a completely crazy thing to do. But we did it. And not only that, but the way he reacted is he went he grabbed a shotgun.
Whoa.
He's ready for it. And then first thing we saw when we came in was this big black satchel on the floor. And it's full of all these metal tools. And they were gynecological tools. That he got somehow. He got hold of these gynecological tools, the ones they use for examining.
Did he point those at you?
No, those were the ones we use as percussion instruments.
For real?
The next day in the studio.
Wow.
And when you hear the Brian beating on the music stand at the beginning of the first song, it's some kind of gynecological instrument. And there were also people just hanging around with us, like Ed Rosen. And Ed Rosen ended up singing the song that we're going to play later on. If you stick to the end of the video, you're going to hear the song that Ed Rosen sang on. Ed from Urge Overkill.
I don't think we fully addressed William and N's question about specific memories you all have of recording Tweez in Evanston and any light you might shed on the recording process for the record.
Well, let's say that Steve Albini had very many idiosyncrasies about recording, right? And we didn't know anything about recording. We didn't know anything about the business of production. We didn't know anything. I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we just let him do his thing. We didn't really know that he had a specific production style that you only get when you record with him. He doesn't like listen to your band and say, "Oh, this is the kind of production style that would go good with this style of music." You get his production style. You get his Big Black style. And it sounds great on Big Black, but that doesn't necessarily translate to some of the other bands he recorded. And what I thought was it didn't really sound good with Slint. And so let's talk about some examples of his production style. For one way, he's against compression. He hated the middle, the lower mid-range frequencies, those are the best frequencies. Those are the feel-good frequencies. And he literally took my bass amp, and there's an EQ in my bass amp, and he pulled three of them down all the way to 0. So it just cut my bass in half. So you had like this one high-end bass going doink, 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 doink. And the other half was so low you could barely even hear it. He believed that vocals don't matter, right? Vocals don't matter. Only production matters. And there used to be in old tape machines back in the old days, there used to be this little button that sometimes called noise reduction. And if you push that button, it takes some of the tape hiss out of the sound. And Steve Albini was vehemently against noise reduction. I remember him telling me. He's against CDs. I'd never even heard a CD. This is 1986. I probably had one CD in my entire collection. All I listened to was cassettes and records still. And he's already absolutely against CDs. Records sound way better than CDs. And we just let his freak flag fly when he recorded Slint. And we let him do all his, put all his idiosyncrasies to the test. And that's how he ended up with that particular album.
I feel like we kind of came to the recording with some of those things already like ingested or middle. I feel like Dave's amp automatically had sort of a scooped sound, like highs, and it was very bassy. And then just from Big Black, I think I know I had sort of internalized, a lot. But at the same time, yeah, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted it to sound like, what the process would be like. The only thing I remember is I liked the way that the snare drum sounded on Sam Hain Initium, which is a pretty crazy sounding snare drum and very produced. So, it was just completely, I was thrilled to be working with him, talking to him, around him, and just sort of kind of up for anything. It was kind of my attitude about it.
Was Steve able to reproduce that Initium snare sound for you? Do you feel like you all approximated that?
I feel like he would have just been like, you don't want that. It never really sounded that way. He definitely listened to me, and we would talk a lot about how certain things we would want him to sound, or just offer suggestions, but I don't think it ever sounded like that.
And he's a very intimidating person. This was peak Steve Albini in 1986. And, he's highly idolized by many people our age, college students and stuff. So it's hard to go. It's hard to go again. He was like the king of, art punk, and so it's hard to go against him for us.
I do feel like Steve's philosophy of recording bands changed drastically, and I don't doubt that your reaction to the mix and you quitting Slint over it, I think that probably impacted. When we recorded with Steve in '99, and he was totally hands off, and his desire, he didn't even want to be called a producer. He wanted to be kind of transparently let your band sound come through. So I think, and I'm kind of aware of Steve and having regretted how that turned out, and kind of regretting being overbearing early in his career as an engineer, because that's what all punk rockers hated going up against when you would record at like a straight studio, was like the dude who ruled the gear, kind of imposing his vision on you all because you didn't know how to use the gear.
But his sound was completely different from every other producer.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I think he grew to be far less interested in taking an active hand in shaping and influence how a band sound beyond mic selection and the sonic setup.
Yeah, he changed. He changed a lot after that.
Yeah, and I think that had something to do with it. I think he was bummed out that he had impacted the band in that way, and that you all weren't as down with everything he foisted upon you all during the recording of that. I think he learned a lot from that, which is not to discredit or de-emphasize the experience you all had, but I don't think that's how Steve Albini was with every band he recorded, is what I'm getting across.
Well, here's my theory of what happened. Okay, this is the time of Big Black. Big Black was huge. Everybody loved Big Black. I love Big Black. We listened to Big Black all summer before we went and recorded with them. And the Big Black shtick is that is basically a serial killer, right? He sings about being. It's kind of like one of those true crime magazines. He's basically singing songs from the point of view of a serial killer. And he's up there and he has like really skinny, pencil skinny legs. And so it's kind of tragic. And you feel like you're the victim of the serial killer. And so he has this really intensely, almost like a sadistic sound, And so it's basically like a serial killer, drilling you in the head or, being a sadist. And that's kind of the appeal of the whole thing. And it's kind of tragic. So he's kind of like the tragic serial killer. And it worked great with Big Black. It's very intense to see Big Black. But it didn't work. It just didn't translate with other bands.
I know he was an aficionado of ugly music and talked quite a bit about how hard it was for punk and post-punk and underground bands to be allowed to achieve ugly sounds when the whole history of recording had been about reproducing and recording and immortalizing melodious sounds.
Right, making you feel good.
Yeah.
And this was also during the time, late 80s, and that's when like punk was getting corporatized. And a lot of, when you think about like Red Hot Chili Peppers, this kind of punk funk. And so some people were totally fine with that. And then other people want to go the other direction and become really edgy. Because punk rock started out very edgy, if you think about the Sex Pistols. And some people just wanted to take it as far as they could go in the other direction. Steve Albini was the one that took it the farthest.
Nobody told me I was going to have to talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Or
I'll see y'all later.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The pop punk and the punk funk,
Well, a lot of bands from the underground that we were a part of were signing with major labels and making the leap at that time. Soul Asylum, Husker Du, Replacements. I guess it was only Minneapolis bands. We're all signing to majors. Meat Puppets did too. Yeah,
that's when that was getting ready to happen. And just like, big bands.
88.
Right, or just big well-known bands are trying to take on a little punk style. Getting a little mohawk or earring or whatever. And Steve Albini just wanted to go the other way.
And maybe that's part of his
Sonic Youth.
Maybe that's part of what drew him to Louisville, is our deep contrarian impulses. Because I really, Sean Garrison talks a lot about the art of self-sabotage and how Louisvillians, you know, there's amazing stuff coming out of here, and we always find a way to ruin it beyond Louisville.
Oh, he was a contrarian, man.
Yeah. And many of us here are too, you know. Present company not excluded. Okay, now we're moving on to, this is a question from Andrew and Jay. The next few questions also reference Steve Albini and his relationship with your music. Andrew and Jay want to know, did Steve Albini get a chance to listen to the new mixes before passing? And if so, did he give his opinion or impression of the new mixes? Britt?
I don't know the answer.
Not to my knowledge. He was aware, and he may have read like what you wrote about it before he wrote what he wrote about it, because in the record, Steve writes a really long piece about this whole thing. But I don't know of him hearing the Ethan's mix or the Tweethin mix.
Yeah, I wondered that. Of course, I wondered that a lot because the guy that mastered it, Bob Weston, you know, he plays bass in a band with Steve Albini, and they went on tour. So I assumed that maybe they were sitting in the van on their tour, and he popped in the tape and played what he had mastered. I don't know. I guess we'll never know the answer to that one.
I mean, Bob would know.
Yeah, I guess we should ask him.
I'll text him in the next break. This one's from Ben. Say that for some reason you were going to re-record Tweez from scratch today. Are there any elements of how you and Steve approached it originally that you would use again? What from the original recording experience would you employ if you were redoing it now?
Well, I remixed it with, Ann remixed it. But, you know, we used the tracks that Steve Albini actually recorded.
Right.
And the tracks were fine, except he cut all the middle out of the bass. But Ann, the mix engineer, she fixed it. She used saturation, because once you cut all that out of the bass on the bass amp and it's recorded on tape, you can't just turn it back up.
Right.
All you got to hear is hiss. There's nothing there. So she used saturation to bring it back. But all the tracks are really good. And it was amazing that we even had access to the same tracking tape. So a lot of studios, you record, and then they just keep the tracking tape, and the next band records over it.
Who kept the master tapes at the end of that session? Did you have them, Britt?
I don't remember who had them, but Corey ended up with them, and we're lucky enough to work with Corey, so he kept them.
I mean, that's a long time to have they digitized it.
Yeah.
Maybe like 20 years ago or something.
I would say, in answer to that question, I would love to re-record it with Steve now, and according to our sort of philosophy behind it, how we sort of originally thought of Slint. I remember it as this idea that was really like cool to me, that it was supposed to be like organic, like plants.
Mm-hmm.
I remember us talking about that, and so I would like to, you know, have, I mean, the parts that I would want to keep from the original is probably most of all just Steve's ear and abilities, because with those, I think we could do, you know, much more of a just like natural sounding recording, which could be, you know, really neat.
Do you feel that Spiderland accomplished that initial desire for a plant-like organic recording?
I feel like it was born out in Spiderland. And we did record that with Brian Paulson, somebody different from Albini, because while we really admired Albini, we just thought that, you know, the record needed something more kind of natural than kind of the way he did things at that time, at least. So
This question is from Brett, not myself. Maybe Brett Holsclaw, but I guess there are more than two Bretts in this world, so maybe not. This is for Ethan.
Okay.
Were you and Steve Albini able to maintain or mend a friendly relationship after your disappointment with the recording and your departure from Slint?
Yes, I always had a friendly relationship with Steve Albini.
Awesome.
I never had any nothing bad ever happened between me and Steve Albini. But for maybe the first year after that recording, when I started doing King Kong, every time I did a fanzine article, some fanzine would interview me, and I'd always say a bunch of smart ass stuff about Steve Albini.
Did you talk to him in later years and stuff?
Every now and then, yeah. Yeah, I didn't spend any great amount of time with him. I did. He mixed Bob Weston. He mixed down a King Kong album. We did it at Steve Albini's studio.
Oh,
So Steve Albini was there.
okay.
He didn't engineer it.
He didn't. It was Bob Weston.
At Electrical.
It was when he had a studio in his house.
Mm-hmm.
So
Francisco.
everything was fine. Steve Albini didn't stick a drill in my head or anything.
Which King Kong record was that?
It was Me Hungry.
Nice.
And so was that the first time you talked to him since Tweez?
Yeah, I mean, I would see him maybe at a show or something if I went up to Chicago, and I'd say hi to him. But yeah, I didn't spend a lot of time with him.
This is also from Brett. Considering your ages at the time, do you feel that the creation of Tweez was hindered or nurtured by things like school, homework, part-time jobs, etc.?
I think because we were young, I was a freshman in college, people were really competitive about bands back then. I mean, there was even in Louisville, some people were really ambitious about their bands. So having band practice was just like playing in a sport or competing, doing homework. Something you really got devoted all your time. When you're 17 or 18 or 19, you got a lot of time to do it, a lot of energy. You don't have any commitments. That's when people get good at doing stuff.
Yeah, I would say it's more the lack of those things that enabled us to, as kids.
Adult responsibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first joined Slint, the only thing I could play on bass was with a pick, chug a lug. And then by the time I learned how to play with my fingers, and then I learned all, the way they play. I never played music like that before.
Do you feel like learning to play with your fingers influenced King Kong? Because you like kind of minimalist but snaky guitar lines that can be kind of like bass lines in a way. Does that feel like a natural progression?
Yeah, that started with Slint.
Interesting.
With those kind of semi-funky bass lines in Slint.
And this is before you're jamming with Smoketown Red or really studying the blues.
Right. All I'd ever done at that point was playing a hardcore band for a year or two. And so I had going into Slint.
Our next question is from Jenny. What do your family members think of Tweez and having songs named after them?
My parents never really gave me a strong opinion about it at all. They probably thought it was kind of weird, but they didn't really think about it too much.
Yeah, I don't know. Sure.
Well, this is a follow-up for Britt. Does your daughter think it's funny to hear songs named after her grandparents?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I know she's very proud of your musical accomplishments, so I would think she would probably think it's cool. But
Well, one thing that's changed since when we were young, if we played in a band, especially a punk rock band, we didn't really even involve our parents too much, or at least I didn't. And nowadays, except for Britt, and Britt was very closely involved with his parents as far as his music goes, because his dad was encouraging Britt to play piano, and his dad's the one that created the practice space. Nowadays, a lot of kids are very close with their parents as far as the kind of music they listen to. And I work at a high school, and all those kids, some of those kids know about Slint just from their parents. So usually you use music to, distinguish yourself from what your parents are into back then, and it's not like that anymore.
I think this is our longest question from Kana, Kana. This person's name is pronounced. Do you think that in the same way humans dream about doing things we've never done, i.e. flying a plane, dogs and cats also have dreams in which they're doing things they see humans do? And if so, do you think the dreams are limited to what that specific animal has witnessed? Or is there shared and communicated general knowledge about humans amongst domesticated animals?
Well, it is always interesting when you see a dog sleeping and they're dreaming, and they start twitching, and you really wish you could know what they were dreaming about. Like, are they running across the snow, pulling a sleigh out in the tundra, or what are they dreaming about? What goes on in their little brain, in their imagination?
I feel like animals have their own sort of life and dreams and stuff that they might not be that interested in what the people are dreaming.
They're dreaming that we don't exist. They have the world to themselves.
Yeah.
With humans, we're just, we're basically still hunters and gatherers. The only thing that's changed is technology. So you could take a baby born right now and throw it, back 2,000 years, it'll be just fine. Nothing's changed with us. Same with like dogs and cats. They're just basically wild animals. They're living with us. And they're probably just dreaming their wild animal dreams.
Is Slint a hunter or a gatherer?
I think we're a gatherer.
Yeah. Yeah?
I feel like that.
All right. This is from Mark. This is for Ethan.
Okay.
Could you please talk about the first King Kong single, Movie Star? What it was like working on that with everyone from Slint, and any other thoughts, stories about it?
Okay, well, here's what happened. Here's how King Kong happened. So I quit Slint. And then I guess maybe 6 months later, I tried to rejoin Slint again. And then Brian said, no, you can't quit and can't come back into the band, so you're out for good. But we'll help you with your King Kong, because I had this King Kong project going on. And he said he would help me as a consolation. They would help me record some King Kong songs. But I couldn't call it Slint. I had to call it something else. So I decided to call it King Kong. This is sort of my idea for post-Albini Slint, was that first King Kong single. So by that time, Britt and Brian were living in Chicago, going to school. And I took a train from Washington, D.C., and I had a 4-track. And Steve Albini was out of town. That Britt had a key to Steve Albini's house. We actually went into Steve Albini's house and recorded 2 of those songs in the basement of his house. And then I hopped back on the train.
Did Brian engineer it?
No, I think I took it to, I recorded it on a 4-track, and I think I had Howie Gano mix it down.
Oh, wow.
I got back to Louisville, and I just took the whole 4-track. Back then, everybody had those little 4-tracks, those cassette 4-tracks, and he just plugged it into his soundboard and he mixed it down for me.
Would you have made that single with Steve if he had been home? Were you willing to work with him again?
I was scared to death. Actually, back then I was scared to death of Steve.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because I rebelled against his recording. He was a big dude back then. So he's a scary and intimidating dude. He had a lot of balls too. He did some really ballsy stuff. His next band was called Rape Man. And he had a song called Kim Gordon's Panties. He had a lot of balls for some of the stuff he did, and I was scared to death. So I was glad he was out of town, and I was glad he didn't know we were in his basement recording this. But yeah, so the first King Kong single is actually Slint. And Dave Pajo actually, for some reason, I forgot what happened, but I had to get Dave Pajo to play drums on a short little song at the end.
And the first Palace Brothers recordings are basically Slint, too, right? I
Um,
mean, I know all four of, not you, Ethan, but the Todd, you, Brian, and Dave were all involved. I don't know if all four of you are on any one particular song,
right. Yeah.
but I mean, it's not like, it's because we're all friends and have been making music together. It's not like you were choosing Slint as a backing band. These were your friends who it would make sense to
Yeah, these are the guys that are
work on projects with.
already been playing music with them anyway.
Right.
And sort of my idea for that first King Kong single was like I was trying to find a new way for Slint. So it was a little bit like, you know, I had Slint in mind when I was putting those songs together.
Cool. Yeah, and Will was actually in Slint before Brian. He was, or no, maybe not before. Maybe before Brian. When we played at the Unitarian, your parents' Unitarian church.
What did he do?
Small tufts of
Yeah. We had a strange name back then.
beads.
Yeah. But Will, he just sat in front of the bass drum because we didn't have time to get anything together, but he was going to play acoustic. That was our idea.
I thought he was
That
going to be
never
the
happened.
singer, the front.
Yeah.
He was going to
Singing.
be. We were talking about him being a singer.
Yeah.
Because it's already obvious. I heard him sing along with the record. I was like, wow, he has a great voice.
Oh, that's cool.
You know, I'll say if there's one lesson that I would like to pass on from all this, is if you're in a band and you're writing original music and you want to have vocals, you got to write the music around the vocals. But if you're an instrumental band and then at the last minute you're like, oh shit, we need vocals, it's really hard to do.
I mean, it always works best when they come into the world simultaneously, when there are words and a vocal melody attached to the music you're writing. When you compose all the music and try to paste vocals on top of it later, it's hard.
It never
And when
works.
you've got a bunch of words and you're trying to come up with music to a finished composition, that's super challenging too. It seems like it always works best when it's
And when people listen to music, they mostly just listen to the vocals.
not me. I tune out the lyrics as often as not because that's usually the weak link in most music is the lyrics. And if you want to enjoy popular music, you kind of got to learn to, like a conversation, to just listen to enough of it to keep you engaged, but tune out, as much of it as you can get away with.
Right.
That's the secret of my success.
I remember when Big Black played right before he recorded Slint. We saw him play, I think, like in Newport, Kentucky, and everybody goes, "Turn up the vocals," and he goes, "Vocals don't matter, and I don't care, and I'm not turning up the vocals."
I would always shout that when I'm watching an instrumental band. Like, turn up the vocals. I can't hear the vocals. I think I did that at a Harlem show once. This question's from Alexander. What is the story behind Bemis and Gerber? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Those are toilet brands. So Bemis was on our toilet seat in college, where Brian and I went to college together, and we lived together. And the toilet seat was made by Bemis, and the toilet was made by Gerber.
Gerber's also a baby food brand.
Yeah, maybe I have those backwards, but that's
Even I did not know that.
yeah.
Nick wants to know, whatever happened to Jennifer Hartman?
She later in life, she became a personal financial planner. Amazingly wonderful, nice person. We reconnected. I believe she lived in Boston for a while.
Did she ever put out any other records?
No, but I just found a slip in an old Tweez that it was sort of like mirroring our, well, maybe actually it came before when we said interested female vocalist, but she basically was just like advertising her record label. But she never did anything else to my recollection.
This is from Ben. Past where the river bends, past where the silo stands, past where they paint the houses, past where they paint the houses. Were these lyrics from Carol in reference to the route to Quarry Bluff from downtown Louisville? The main 180-degree meander round Jeffersonville, the Brooks Grain silo on Utica Pike, and the proud whitewashed weatherboarded homes of Utica?
Wow. Somebody knows a thing or two about Utica.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Did Brian
That's
write those
super
lyrics?
Cool. Yeah.
Do you know if that's about going to the quarry?
I don't, man. That's a good question.
Seems plausible given.
Right, but the quarry, the times of the quarry was after that.
You don't think we went there at that early?
I think I did. I think I went to the quarry.
Were you the first one to go there? Did you tell the rest of them about it?
Yeah, it started out me and Darren and my other friend. We used to go to the quarry and smoke pot, go swimming. And I guess maybe that's when, but maybe that's a really good point. But they did that photograph for Spiderland. That was a lot later.
Right.
That's weird. Somebody knows all about Utica.
Yeah.
That was a good question, man.
This is from Mark. Britt, could you please talk about your current project, Jungle Boogie?
With Ken Brown, who has been in Tortoise, Pullman, and numerous other bands.
Bastro, I think.
Bastro, yeah, he's done a lot of worked with a lot of musicians and done a lot of like mixing and stuff like that. We have it's an improvisation project where we would play and just improvise. And our friend Tim Barnes, who's just an incredible musician, lived in New York for a long time, played with many people. We played with him, and so he's had some health issues that have kept him from playing as much, but we still get together some. And
The performance you all did most recently at Planet of the Tapes, where Tim sat in for most of the set, and then some of the other musicians as well, was really stirring. It was an amazing show.
Thanks.
This is from multiple people. Any plans for a tour? And I'm pretty sure multiple people mean a Slint tour, not a Jungle Boogie tour, just to clarify.
No. Yeah.
I figured that would be a short
I don't even do King Kong tours anymore.
one. This is from Rick. When Slint was active, did you feel like your young age affected how seriously people took you or your music?
I mean, I felt like I was always taken way more seriously than, most people. So I just feel like I had a really lucky time of being around older people that, gave us the time of day and were nice and stuff.
That's something really beautiful about the scene we come from is, coming from the South End when I was 15 and felt like, I had never been to a punk show yet. My first punk show, I had to play. I had no idea what was going to happen. And I felt like everyone in the scene was always so welcoming and accommodating. No one pulled rank on you or made you feel like an interloper or a poser. I kind of feel like the opposite. Like, I think how young and normal looking you all were, and maybe not intimidating as a lot of people in the punk scene. I think that made your music that much heavier and more impressive than, I don't think it made people discredit you all. I think people were blown away that these young, not over the top presences were producing this unprecedented music. Like, I think it made it more impressive to me.
We were an introverted band, for sure. We were all very introverted. And Britt at the time, even when Britt was 16, he kind of looked like he's like he had sort of a serious, like adult-like demeanor about him. He kind of scowled and stuff. He's like a little bit like Steve Albini too. And people didn't take me very seriously.
Do you felt, this just popped into my head, given the introversion of all the members, do you feel like the four of you played specific roles or took certain roles within the band, and what would each member's role be, if that's accurate at all?
Yeah, sure. Well, at the beginning of the Tweethin mix, I took a little piece of our band practice where we're like talking, like getting it together, so you could kind of hear us all doing our roles. Where Brian's going, all right, and I was like, come on, get your sound together, let's go.
Yeah.
Did you all record every rehearsal?
We only have one tape of one rehearsal, but if we recorded other ones, we don't have them anymore.
Because a lot of bands did. I think we didn't record every rehearsal in Malignant Growth, but we recorded a lot of them. I think in Rising Shotgun, we recorded every rehearsal. We just jam and then take parts that we liked and develop them. I didn't know if that was a part of the process for Slint. Because you recorded everything with that jam box. Like a lot of live shows back then, and I wondered, and the Maurice demo was made with that. I wondered if you all were recording most of your Slint.
I don't think we ever used that as a tool to like record a jam and then listen back to it or anything like that.
I think it was actually Darren, the tape that I based the Tweethin mix on. I think Darren recorded it.
Oh, you all didn't even do it.
I think Darren was, because other people would come to our practices.
Always.
And so Darren came and I think he recorded it. And he recorded it on a stereo jam box.
I mean, that was a social hub of our adolescence. I feel like going to not just your bands, but other bands' practices.
We go to other band practices and check out the other bands.
For sure. The Malignant Growth rehearsal space was like a huge party every time, even if it was Tuesday or Wednesday night. All right, I guess before we ask the last question and get on to the debut of the Tweethin, which song is it?
It's called Hippie Chick. It used to be called, the Tweez version is Warren, but it's a song where Ed Roser's the singer. And I changed the name for the Tweethin mix to Hippie Chick. So stick around and you get to hear it, plus see a video that goes with it.
But I want to thank you all for talking with me today. It's been a lot of fun. I always love hanging out with you all. And we should thank Corey at Touch and Go for putting this out and putting out so much great music. And Ben Crowell for putting this all together and enlisting us.
And Mary that's recording us.
And Mary for recording.
Yes.
Lady Jam's Juice
Mary
Box
Yates.
on WXOX. And so our last question before we get to the world premiere of Hippie Chick is from April. Given the insular nature of music scenes in the 80s and 90s compared to today's global visibility through the internet, social media, etc., how do you think Slint or Tweez would be different if you were doing it today?
That's an extremely hypothetical question.
Yeah, it's so different. I have no idea. I don't know what we'd be doing if we were around today, right?
With the Touch and Go and Drag City, all those scenes were very insular back then. You kind of like always saw the same people popping up. And it's sort of like, what was funny about it. Whether people can be so insular nowadays, I don't know. I don't think young people are as culty as they used to be.
Yeah.
I feel like the scene's more inclusive than it's ever been. You'll see 12, 14-year-old kids, and you'll see guys in their 60s and everyone
Right.
in between. I don't feel like
And high school kids go to shows with their parents. You know, that never happened when I was a teenager. There's no way anybody was going to go see the Dead Kennedys with their parents.
yeah.
You know, they do it all the time.
Yeah, my mom took me to see Kiss and AC/DC, but she never took me to a punk show. We have one last question, and it's from an anonymous source. And they would like to know what pig fuck means, Ethan.
Okay, when I used to say pig fuck after we recorded with Steve Albini, and I used to say, we got Albini eyes, we got pig fucked. And I got pig fuck out of a fanzine when I used to live with David Grubbs in Washington, D.C., and he had a big stack of fanzines. And I read his fanzines, and I kept seeing the word pig fuck. And if you Google the word pig fuck, it just means bands from Chicago in the 80s, punk rock bands like Big Black and Jesus Lizard and Urge Overkill and the Butthole Surfers. So I did not make that word up, and it wasn't necessarily a bad word back then. That's what they call that style of music. They call it pig fuck. And you can call it edgelord, whatever. But that's what I called it. I called it pig fuck. And in fact, I could even go further and say that other bands, like other things are pig fuck, like Lisa Suck Dog and Royal Trucks.
Killdozer.
Yeah, stuff that was, they were basically against feeling good.
The ugliness we
Right.
talked about, like willfully ugly.
Right. Like, can you take it? Can you take this?
Mm.
Can you handle it? This is so intense. And it was a thing back then. It was a really big thing back then in the 80s. And I didn't know what else to call it. But it was a thing, and I called it pig fuck. So don't anybody take it personally if I say, that's pig fuck. Because I don't even talk like that anymore. I don't even use that word anymore.
Pig.
Fuck.
The cows.
And I thought that the first Slint, some of the gags on the first the Tweez mix, I thought was pig fuck. That's what I used to call it. So no disrespect to any of you out there.
To any pig fuckers.
Oh, you pig fuckers. It's a thing. Google it. You'll see.
Yeah, we're talking about musical pig fucking, not
Right.
actual pig
If you can Google it, it's a thing.
All right.
All right. So here's the song Hippie Chick with a video. That used to be called Warren on the Tweez mix, and I changed the name to Hippie Chick on the Tweethin mix. So here it is, Hippie Chick. Check it out.
Those goddamn tweezers.
Now that we've heard Hippie Chick, I'm going to play the part of Warren Ethan left
Wait a
off
minute.
the
Wait a minute. I don't
remix.
want to hear that. You can't play that.